I wasn't born into much. My father laid bricks till his back gave out, and my mother cleaned motel rooms well into her 60s. Nobody handed me anything but calloused hands and an expectation to do better than they did. And I did. At least I tried. By the time I was 22, I had a wrench in one hand and a baby boy in the other. My wife passed not long after he turned 6, a quiet cancer, the kind that creeps up and doesn't leave room for goodbyes. From that day on, it was just me and him. Before we dive into the details, drop a comment on where you're watching from and hit that subscribe button. Trust me, you don't want to miss this. I didn't complain. I didn't have time to. I took every shift they offered. Nights, weekends, holidays. I missed birthdays. Not because I didn't care. God, no. But because rent doesn't wait for grief. I'd slip toy trucks under his pillow before heading to work. He never saw me tuck them in, but I know he found them. He always lined them up in neat little rows, waiting for me when I got home. We weren't rich, but he never went to bed hungry. Not once. Every time I got a raise, I put it in a separate account, his name on it, not mine. When I paid off the house, I told the lawyer to start the paperwork for the will. I wanted no confusion. Everything I had, the roof over our heads, the land under our feet, the beat-up truck, the retirement fund, it all had one destination: him. I didn't chase dreams. I built stability. I didn't date again. Never remarried. People called it noble. Truth is, I just didn't have room in my heart for anything else. My son was the job, the home, the legacy. I remember this one night, maybe when he was around 10. He came to me with a school project about heroes. I figured he'd pick some athlete or cartoon, but he stood in front of the class and said, "My dad's my hero. He fixes things. He never leaves." That stuck with me. I held on to that sentence like it was a medal, and for years I believed I had done it right. No frills, no debt, no broken promises. But here's the thing about building a life around someone else. If they decide to walk away, the whole house starts to crack. I didn't see it back then. Back then, I was proud. Proud of my hands, my scars, the paper trail of sacrifice that led to my son's every comfort. I thought love was enough. I thought blood meant something. Turns out, even a house built from the ground up can be bulldozed if the person you built it for decides it's not worth keeping. I used to picture retirement like a quiet sunrise. Slow mornings, coffee on the porch, maybe teaching my grandkids how to fish one day. I imagined phone calls from my son asking if I wanted to swing by for dinner. I imagined laughter in the living room, the smell of something baking, a spot at the table with my name on it. What I got was silence. The first few weeks weren't too strange. People are busy, I told myself that. He had a family now, a mortgage, kids, work. I didn't want to be a burden, so I waited. I didn't call much, didn't want to hover, as they say. But one Saturday morning, I decided to surprise them with donuts and fresh strawberries from the market, the kind he used to beg for when he was little. I knocked, waited. When the door opened, it wasn't my son who greeted me. It was her, my daughter-in-law. She looked surprised, not warm, not rude exactly, but measured, like someone caught in the middle of something private. "Oh," she said, "we didn't know you were coming." I remember holding out the bag and saying, "Just thought I'd drop off a treat." She didn't invite me in. That was the first time I felt it. That shift, that tightening in my chest that whispered, "Something's off." My son called later that day, not to thank me for the strawberries, but to gently suggest that next time I should give them a heads up before stopping by. "Just so we can plan around it," he said. His voice was light, but it carried something behind it, something rehearsed. I laughed it off, said of course, no problem. But after I hung up, I sat in the kitchen alone, staring at my own plate, the same one I used to fill for him. I hadn't realized how cold the house had gotten until then. From that point on, everything went through her. If I asked him about a weekend visit, he'd say, "Let me check with Maya." If I invited them over, he'd text back, "Maya's not feeling well," or "Maya says the kids have a lot going on." It was always Maya. He used to call me for advice. Now he didn't even call to say hello. I told myself I was imagining it, that I was being sensitive. But deep down, I knew. I was being managed, fit into their schedule like an errand, something to be approved, slotted, and, if necessary, postponed. And when I did visit, something about the air in that house felt strained. I'd try to joke with the kids, but they were always busy. I'd offer to help with dishes, and she'd politely wave me off. I sat in the living room while they whispered in the kitchen. I told myself it was just stress, a phase. But the truth was colder than that. For the first time in my life, I started to feel like a guest, not in their house, but in my own family. It was a Tuesday evening, early spring, the kind of evening when the breeze still carries a little chill, but the sun sticks around just long enough to paint the walls gold. They'd invited me to dinner, or maybe I invited myself. I can't quite remember now. Either way, I brought over a pie from that bakery down on 4th, hoping it might thaw the ice I'd been feeling between us. Dinner was fine. Not warm, not tense, just fine. Polite smiles. My grandson glued to his tablet. My son talking about work. Maya complimented the crust of the pie, but her eyes never really met mine. Afterward, I stepped out onto the back porch to get some air. I used to stain that porch every summer, back when I still had a ladder in me. I leaned on the railing, watching the trees I planted when my son was a teenager. Funny how something can grow strong while you're being quietly pushed aside. I was about to head back in when I heard their voices. They didn't know I was standing just outside the kitchen window. "Once Dad's out of the picture," Maya said. I froze. She laughed softly. "I'm just saying, once he's not here anymore, we could sell this place, move somewhere with a better school district." There was a pause. Then my son said, "Yeah. I mean, it's already in our name. It'd be stupid not to cash in. Houses on this block are going for a fortune." Our name. Cash in. I stood there, the cold of the railing biting into my hand. I built that house, laid the tile myself, repaired that very window they were speaking behind. Every nail, every coat of paint, every dime, mine. I wasn't eavesdropping, not intentionally. But once you hear your own expiration date being calculated into someone else's plan, you don't move. You just exist in that moment, quietly erased. They weren't talking about me like I was a person. They were talking about me like I was a puzzle piece they were just waiting to remove. Not with malice. No, it was worse than that. Indifference. I walked back to my car without saying goodbye. They probably thought I'd just gotten tired. Maybe they didn't notice at all. I drove home in silence. No radio. Just the sound of the turn signal and the buzz in my ears that comes when your heart's been cracked without anyone raising their voice. That night, I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I had misunderstood. Maybe they didn't mean it that way. Maybe I was taking it too personally. But those words echoed anyway. Once Dad's out of the picture. And that's when it hit me. They weren't waiting for me to leave this house. They were waiting for me to leave this life. A few days passed before I worked up the nerve to bring it up. I kept rehearsing it in my head. How to say it without sounding accusatory, without sounding old. That's what I was afraid of more than anything, that they'd start treating me like I was losing it. I called my son on a Sunday. I knew he'd be home. He always posted his lazy Sunday breakfasts on social media. Pancakes, bacon, filtered sunshine through their spotless kitchen window. When he picked up, I kept my tone light. "Hey son, you got a minute? He did. Barely. We talked for a few minutes about nothing. I asked about the kids. He gave short answers, like I'd interrupted something. Then I cleared my throat and said, "Listen, I overheard something the other night at dinner." "About selling the house?" Silence. Then came the chuckle. That soft, dismissive laugh I hadn't heard from him since he was a teenager trying to lie his way out of a speeding ticket. "Dad," he said, "you're being paranoid." I felt my stomach twist, not because he denied it, I expected that, but because of the way he said it, like I was the problem, like my concern was a nuisance. "I'm not accusing you," I said carefully. It didn't sit right. You called it your house, and I worked my whole life." "Relax," he cut in. "We'll always take care of you." That should have been comforting, should have meant something, but the way he said it, flat, obligatory, felt like a pat on the head. "We'll always take care of you," like I was an aging pet. I hung up soon after. I didn't press it. I didn't want to push him away further, but after that call, the space between us stretched wider. Not physically, emotionally. He called less. The kids stopped sending little drawings. Visits got canceled last minute, if they were planned at all. One week it was the flu. Next week it was soccer. Then it was Maya, needing a break. I stopped asking. I started watching the days pass like scenery outside a train window. I was still on the ride, but I had no destination, no say in the stops. Just moving forward, quietly fading. They stopped inviting me to birthdays. "Oh, it was just a few friends," he'd say. "Didn't want to overwhelm you." Overwhelm me. Like I was some fragile vase they had to bubble wrap. At first, I told myself they were just busy, that it was a phase, but the truth stood tall and unmoving. I was no longer part of their plans. I was background noise in a house I'd built with my bare hands, a guest in the life I had spent decades creating. And when someone tells you you're being paranoid, but everything else in your life starts disappearing, it doesn't feel like paranoia. It feels like prophecy. It was supposed to be a routine meeting, nothing heavy, just some paperwork about property taxes and a quick catch-up. I'd used Mr. Calder for nearly 30 years. He was more than a lawyer. He was someone I shared coffee and Christmas cards with. Trusted, familiar. I even paid for his daughter's piano fundraiser once. When I stepped into his office that Tuesday, he greeted me with the same old grin. Still wore the same brown tweed jacket with frayed cuffs. For a while, it felt like normal. Two old men chatting about the weather and the rising price of everything. We laughed about gas prices. Then he flipped through a folder and paused. "Oh, and the update to the estate plan was finalized," he said casually, sliding a paper forward. "You're all set." I blinked. "What update?" Calder tilted his head. Didn't your son tell you?" "Tell me what?" He cleared his throat, eyes darting from the page to me and back again. That's when I knew something was wrong. He turned the paper around slowly, like revealing a bad hand in a card game. It was my will. Or rather, it used to be. I scanned it once, twice. My name was there, but only as the original account holder. The beneficiaries had changed, entirely. The house, the savings, the stocks I quietly collected over the years. Every single item now listed my son and Maya. I wasn't even secondary. "Wait," I said, voice thin. "Who approved this?" Calder hesitated. "Your son said it was with your full knowledge, that you wanted everything consolidated, for tax purposes." I sat back in my chair. For a moment the room felt too small. The air thinned. I stared at the ink that had erased me. "I never saw this," I said quietly. His expression cracked. "Oh. Well, that's concerning." Concern wasn't the word for it. I had paid this man for decades. I'd trusted him with every document that mattered. He'd watched my son grow up, shook his hand at the wedding, sent gifts when the kids were born. And yet, here we were. My name removed like a coffee stain, wiped clean. "Can it be reversed?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. He nodded slowly. "Yes, but it would require, well, a conversation. A conversation. A confrontation." I stared at the paper again. It was just a stack of words, really. Ink on parchment. But it felt heavier than any wrench I'd ever lifted. Because it told the truth. Plain and cold. I was no longer seen as the one who built the legacy. I was now just the man, taking up space within it. I stood up without another word, leaving the will on his desk. My knees ached more than usual that day. Outside, the sky was clear, unbothered. I sat in my truck, door open, hand on the wheel, and for the first time in my life, I didn't know where to go. I didn't yell, didn't punch a wall. That's not the kind of man I am. I went home, set my keys down on the counter, and sat at the kitchen table like I had 1,000 times before. Only this time, the silence wasn't peaceful. It had weight, like it was pressing down on my shoulders, daring me to move. I didn't. I just sat there, staring at my hands. These same hands that once carried a toddler on one hip while fixing a busted faucet with the other. These same hands that signed the checks for his college tuition, wrote the down payment for their first home, handed him the keys to a used Toyota with a red bow on top. He hugged me that day, said, "I'll pay you back, Dad." I didn't care about the money. Never did. But now? Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. About every favor that went unthanked. Every "just this once" that turned into a pattern. Every time I bailed him out, lent him money, or said yes when I should have said, "Let me think about it." I had paid for the lawyer they used to write me out. Paid for the house they were waiting to sell. Paid for their wedding, the one where I gave a speech about how proud I was to be handing over my son to a wonderful woman. I had funded the very machine that erased me, and I didn't even get the courtesy of a conversation, not even a lie to my face, just paperwork. I made coffee I didn't drink, stared at a photo on the wall. The three of us, years ago, sitting on the porch after building a treehouse. My son was maybe 12, hammer in hand, sawdust in his hair. He'd begged to help, said he wanted to build something with me. He was so proud of that treehouse. I was so proud of him. Now I wondered if he remembered it at all. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the legal details or the money. It wasn't even the selfishness. It was how easy it seemed for them, how quiet it was, how clean. No confrontation, no harsh words, just deletion. I was erased like I was never part of the story. Like a smudge on a mirror someone wipes away without a second thought. And that was what broke me. Not loudly, but quietly. In a way you can't hear from the outside. In a way only a father would know. Birthdays used to mean something in our house, not because of gifts or cake. We were never big on that. But there was always a call, a hug, a quiet moment that said, "I see you." I remember the year he was 12. He saved up his allowance to buy me a pocket knife. Said every dad needed one. I still have it, dull as it is. Never could bring myself to sharpen it. This year, the day started the same as most others. Coffee, quiet, morning news humming low in the background. I waited a bit, thinking maybe he'd call before work. By noon, I told myself he was just busy. Maybe something came up with the kids. By 3, I was glancing at my phone every 5 minutes, as if staring would make it ring. By dinner, it still hadn't. No text, no call, nothing. I finally picked up the phone and dialed his number. A simple, stupid move. Familiar. Like muscle memory. It rang 4 times before the voicemail kicked in. His voice, chipper and efficient. "Hey, it's me. Leave a message." I didn't. I just sat there listening to the silence that followed. Later that night, I scrolled through my neighbor's Facebook page. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for a distraction. That's when I saw it. A tagged photo of Maya, standing on a beach in Tulum, drink in hand, sun setting behind her. The caption read, "Finally, some time away. Just the two of us. No kids, no noise." I looked at the date. Posted that morning. So, that's where they were. No emergency, no illness, no scheduling conflict. Just a vacation. One that, apparently, I didn't even deserve a text during. I didn't cry. The tears had dried up somewhere between the lawyer's office and the kitchen table. What I felt wasn't sadness anymore. It was something quieter, emptier. It was the sound of a string snapping inside. I put the phone down, poured myself a glass of water, sat in the dark, and something shifted. Not like a thunderclap, not rage, no vengeance rising in my chest, just silence. A silence that told me the father they once needed didn't exist to them anymore. And maybe, just maybe, he didn't need to keep existing for them either. That was the night something inside me shut off. The switch I had carried for decades, the one labeled Dad, flicked for the first time. Not completely off, not yet, but dimmer, cold, detached. It was my birthday, and I spent it realizing I no longer had a place in the very life I built. It wasn't some grand decision. There was no speech, no dramatic vow made into the mirror. I just stopped calling. That Monday morning, my thumb hovered over my son's name in my phone, like it always did. I used to text him a quick "thinking of you," or ask how the kids were doing, whether they needed anything. It had become routine. Me reaching out, him replying hours later, if at all. But that morning, I locked the phone and slid it into the drawer. Just once, I thought. Let's see what happens if I don't. Nothing happened. No call that night. No text the next day. No email. No knock at the door. The world didn't shake. No one noticed. So I kept not calling. At first it stung. Every hour that passed in silence felt like a confirmation that I was only ever a footnote now. An old man in the margins of their lives. I told myself it was fine, that I needed the space too, but I was lying, at least in the beginning. I counted the days. First 3, then 5, then 10. Each one a new kind of ache. Not sharp, dull, heavy, like standing outside your own house with the lights off, listening to the muffled laughter inside. Then something shifted. Somewhere around day 12, I realized I hadn't reached for the phone all day. I'd taken a walk down by the lake, had lunch alone, sat under a tree and watched the light dance through the leaves. And for the first time in a long while, I felt okay. Not good, not healed, but okay. Peace doesn't arrive like thunder. It shows up in the quiet, when the noise finally dies down. And with that peace came something I hadn't felt in years. Clarity. I began to see the pattern, how every interaction had revolved around their convenience. How I had been holding on to a role they no longer respected. I wasn't family. I was furniture. Useful when needed. Forgotten otherwise. And it wasn't just them. It was me. I had trained them to see me that way. By always saying yes. By making excuses. By loving without boundaries. Somewhere along the line, I'd mistaken unconditional love for unconditional access. So I made a new vow. Not out of bitterness, but out of self-respect. No more calls. If they needed me, they'd know where to find me. And if they didn't, well, then I would finally know the truth I'd been afraid to face. It's funny how the people who see you most aren't always the ones you share blood with. Jeremy's been the mailman on this street for about 5 years now. Young guy, maybe mid-30s, always got his headphones in. Always greets you like you matter. Rain, snow, heat, he never misses a day. I'd see him every other morning around 10, always with that satchel slung across his chest like it weighed nothing. At first we just nodded. Then one day I offered him a bottle of water. After that, it turned into 5-minute chats. Talk about the weather, the ball game, gas prices. Just two men filling a silence that didn't feel heavy for once. I didn't know much about him until one morning, cold and drizzling, he paused under my awning to shake the rain off his cap. "You always out here early?" he asked. I shrugged. "Hard to break habits when you've had them for decades." He laughed. "Yeah, my old man used to say that. Then again, he bailed when I was 10. That's when he told me. Grew up with a single mom, no brothers. Said he never had someone to show him how to change a tire or swing a hammer. He learned most of it through YouTube and trial and error. Said he envied guys who had fathers who stuck around. "You remind me of who I wish I had," he said. Just like that. Simple. Honest. Eyes still watching the road, like he hadn't said anything at all. And just like that. That one sentence hit me harder than any birthday card, any Father's Day text, any hollow "love you" left on read. You remind me of who I wish I had. I stood there longer than I needed to that morning. Watched him go mailbox to mailbox, steady as ever. A kid with no father, telling an old man he mattered. Jeremy didn't know my story. He didn't know I was slowly being erased by the very son I gave my life to. But somehow, in that small exchange, he gave me something no one else had in years. He gave me back my dignity, not because I was useful, not because I paid for college or bought him a car, but because I simply showed up, was consistent, present. And that quiet presence, was worth more than all the legal documents and unspoken disappointments in the world. Funny how a man with no father could make me feel more seen than my own flesh and blood. There's an old filing cabinet in my garage. Beige metal, rust at the corners, one drawer that sticks no matter how much you jiggle it. I've had it since the late 80s. Used to keep appliance manuals in there. Later, tax returns, mortgage papers, photos. Over the years, it became a kind of time capsule, one I hadn't opened in ages. But after that morning with Jeremy, something tugged at me. Not anger, not quite, just an itch, a feeling I hadn't let myself explore. What if I wasn't as powerless as they thought? So I dug in. Took me half the afternoon to sort through it all. The dust made my eyes sting. I found receipts from his first crib, the bill of sale from the old Ford I gave him when he turned 18, birthday cards he'd drawn with crayons. I held them carefully, like they might disintegrate under the weight of what we'd become. Then, at the very bottom, in a yellowing folder marked Estate, I found it. The original will. My handwriting in blue ink, signatures from the notary, my full intention laid out in plain English. Everything. The house, the savings, the land, to my son. But it was still mine. Untouched. Unaltered. Unrevoked. They hadn't destroyed it. They'd simply written over it, assuming I'd either forgotten or wouldn't bother checking. But here it was. Legal. Powerful. Alive. Right next to it was a list I'd scribbled years ago. Trusted contacts, financial institutions, passcodes I'd tucked away in case of an emergency. I'd written, "in case something happens" at the top, back when I still believed I'd be handing over a legacy, not cleaning up after my own erasure. And that's when the spark hit me. I wasn't erased. I had just been quiet. Too quiet. But the paperwork still bore my name. The bank accounts were still under my control. And as long as I still had breath in my lungs, I wasn't done writing the ending. Something shifted in my chest. Not bitterness, not revenge, just steel, a calm resolve. They wanted the house without the man who built it. They wanted the money without the memory of where it came from. They wanted the story without the author. Well, they'd forgotten I kept the first draft, and I was about to write a different ending. It felt different walking into that office the second time. My back was straighter, my breath steady, no trembling hands. I wasn't the man reeling from betrayal anymore. I was the man carrying the pen. Calder looked up from his desk, surprised. "Didn't expect to see you again so soon," he said, standing to shake my hand. "I have a few updates to make," I replied, voice even. He nodded slowly, reading my face. He must have seen it. The change. The quiet finality behind my eyes. We got to work. I spoke plainly. No anger, just facts. "Remove my son as beneficiary," I said, "and his wife. I want it all reassigned." "To whom?" he asked, pen hovering. I paused for only a second, then said the name that had been circling my mind like a lighthouse beam. "Jeremy." Jeremy Collins Calder blinked. "The mailman. That's the one." He hesitated for a moment, maybe trying to read between the lines, trying to decide if I was joking. I wasn't. And once he saw that, he didn't ask questions. We went through everything. The house, the retirement accounts, the land out near the lake I bought but never built on. The safe deposit box at First Union Bank with the old coins, birth certificates, and the letter my wife wrote before she passed. All of it. To Jeremy. Then I reached into my coat and handed Calder a second envelope. This one wasn't for Jeremy. "This goes to my son," I said. He opened it, scanned the page briefly. Just a letter. No check. No instructions. Just truth. I didn't fill it with guilt. That wasn't the point. It wasn't a punishment. It was a mirror. I told him everything I had done for him, not to boast, but so he couldn't forget. I reminded him of the crib, the college, the wedding. I listed the birthdays missed and the jobs taken just to keep his world spinning. I reminded him that I gave him everything, and he gave me silence in return. And then I wrote the one line that took the most strength to put on paper. "You will inherit nothing from me, except the memory of what you threw away." Calder looked up after reading it. There was no smugness in his face, just respect. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I've never been more sure of anything." He stamped the paperwork, notarized the changes, filed them with quiet efficiency. When I left that office, the wind felt colder, but the weight on my chest was gone. I didn't walk out bitter. I walked out free. Not because I took something from my son, but because, for the first time in years, I gave something back to myself. My voice, my choice, my dignity. It was a Thursday evening when I showed up at their door. No call, no text, just me. In the same jacket I wore to his graduation, holding a small bag of groceries like some character out of a life they'd forgotten they still shared. The porch light flicked on, and Maya opened the door. She blinked, surprised, then masked it with a tight smile. "Oh, hi," she said, half stepping outside. "We weren't expecting you." I smiled back, warm as ever. "Thought I'd cook dinner tonight. Just the three of us, for old time's sake." She hesitated, long enough for me to see her calculating, weighing the PR optics of turning away the old man who raised her husband. Eventually, she forced a smile and nodded. "Sure, come in." The house hadn't changed, still spotless, curated, cold. The walls filled with framed words like family and grateful, but not a single photo of me in sight. My son came in from the patio, barefoot, holding a beer. He froze for a moment when he saw me, then the grin, the fake kind he'd learned in corporate meetings. "Dad, this is a surprise." I set the groceries on the counter. "Hope you're hungry." They offered to help, but I waved them off. I knew this kitchen better than Maya ever would. I had installed the cabinets, after all. I moved with the ease of a man who'd built the foundation, even if the furniture had changed. Dinner was quiet. Small talk. Kids upstairs with their nanny. Maya mentioned a yoga retreat. My son talked about a possible promotion. They were trying to pretend the fracture hadn't already formed, that we were still playing the same roles in the same act. but I wasn't playing any more. At one point, my son asked how I'd been. I looked at him and said, "Peaceful." He didn't know what to do with that. After dessert, I stood. "Well," I said, "this was lovely. I should head home." Maya offered a bland, "Thank you for dinner." My son walked me to the door, rubbing the back of his neck like he wanted to say more but couldn't find the words. At the door, I turned to him and smiled. "Thanks for letting me stop by," I said. "Of course," he replied. "You're always welcome." I nodded. "That's kind of you." We stood there for a second too long. Then I turned and walked away, my shoes crunching on the gravel I once spread myself. They thought it was just a visit, just a nostalgic meal with an aging man clinging to tradition. They didn't realize I had already said goodbye. Not out loud, but in every quiet bite, every polite nod, every untouched apology. They didn't know it, but I had just left their lives for good. It happened on a Tuesday morning. No drama, no last words, just sleep that stretched too long and never gave me back. Jeremy found me. He always dropped the mail off around 10, but he said later something felt off that day. Said the curtains were still drawn. Said my porch light had stayed on through the night. He knocked once, then again, and when there was no answer, he called the sheriff, like I told him to in the emergency card taped to my fridge. They said I looked peaceful, that I'd gone quietly, like the kind of man who never wanted to make a fuss. The funeral was exactly how I asked for it. Small, simple, with no fanfare. Just the people who had actually shown up in the last chapter of my life. Jeremy spoke. His voice cracked when he called me a friend, said I gave him more fatherhood in 5 years of mail routes than he'd ever known growing up. There was no slideshow, no church choir, no catered meal, just closure. My son didn't attend. To be fair, he didn't know yet. The letter reached him the following day, hand-delivered by a courier, not Jeremy. I made sure of that. I didn't want him to feel used in all of this. It arrived in a plain envelope, nothing dramatic, just his name, written in my careful handwriting, the kind I used to sign field trip slips and write notes in his lunchbox. Inside, 2 pages, no checks, no apology, no anger, just the truth. I told him I had passed, that if he were reading this, I was already gone, that I'd made peace with many things, but not with him. I reminded him of everything he'd chosen to forget. The nights I stayed up fixing his science projects. The time I drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to watch him sit on the bench during a playoff game. The years I gave him my whole life, and never asked for anything in return but time, which in the end he withheld. I wrote, "You stopped calling. I noticed. You left me out of your plans. I forgave you. But when you erased me, quietly, legally, you taught me who I really was to you. A stepping stone, a wallet, a placeholder for someone more convenient. Then, at the very end, there is no inheritance, no house, no money, but there is a legacy, and you are not part of it." That was all. By the time he finished reading, the estate had already been transferred, keys handed over, documents sealed. My life, my legacy, already passed to a man who had earned it, not by blood, but by kindness. My son never got the chance to say goodbye. But then again, he was the one who left first. He probably read it at the kitchen table, the same one I paid for, the same one where I once sat with him as a boy, teaching him how to tie a tie before his first school dance. I imagine his hands trembling just a little as he unfolded the paper. My handwriting wasn't what it used to be, but the message was clear. "I never needed your money," I began. "Only your time, your respect, a phone call now and then, not out of obligation, but because you remembered I existed." I didn't write it to hurt him. I didn't lace it with guilt. There were no insults, no anger scratched between the lines. Just truth, The kind that sits in the pit of your stomach long after you've stopped reading. I told him I noticed when he started deferring to Maya for everything. That every time he said, "Let me check with her," a piece of the man I raised faded from view. I reminded him how it felt the first time I was turned away from their front door with a pie in my hands and nowhere to put it. It wasn't about the pie, I wrote. It was about no longer being welcome. I brought up the will, the one they rewrote behind closed doors. The betrayal wasn't the paper. It was the silence, the way they made decisions as if I were already gone. "You didn't have the courage to look me in the eye and tell me I didn't matter anymore," I said. "So you told a lawyer instead." And then I told him about Jeremy, not out of spite, but because it mattered. I told him about how Jeremy asked how I was doing when no one else did, how he listened without checking his watch, how he spoke to me like I was still a man, not some relic on a porch with nothing left to offer. "He didn't owe me anything," I wrote, "but he gave me dignity. And in the end, that was worth more than blood." I ended the letter the only way I knew how. Honest. Final. I hope one day you understand what you lost. Not the money, not the house, but the chance to know the man who gave it all for you. I sealed the letter with no return address. There was nowhere left to return to. I imagine he sat there, holding the paper like it might disappear. Maybe Maya read it over his shoulder. Maybe she didn't. Maybe he crumpled it. Maybe he kept it in a drawer. But whether he admitted it or not, those words would stay. Because you can ignore a voicemail. You can delete a text. But when a man writes you the truth in his final breath, you carry that with you. Forever. Jeremy didn't know until the letter arrived at his apartment. A plain envelope, same as the one I sent my son. But his hands shook when he opened it. He said later he thought it was just a thank you note. Maybe a holiday card I'd forgotten to give. Instead, it was everything. The deed to the house, the keys to the safe deposit box, the full contents of the estate, spelled out in clean legal language. He cried. Not quiet tears either. He told me he sat on his front steps, still in uniform, sobbing with the letter in his lap and a bag of unopened mail at his feet. He'd never owned a home before. Grew up in apartments with thin walls and ceilings that dripped when it rained. Said his dream was just to have a porch one day. Somewhere to sit and drink coffee in the morning without hearing arguments through drywall. Now, he had a mansion. But more than that, he had a home with a story, one he cared to honor. He didn't waste a day. First came the garden, the one I'd let go wild in those final years. Jeremy brought it back to life with fresh soil and sunflowers, planted tomatoes in raised beds like I used to, even built a bench under the dogwood tree where I once read the paper on Sundays. He invited the neighborhood kids to play in the yard, said a home should be full of laughter, not just memories. He put out a tire swing, even painted the old shed that had nearly collapsed from neglect. Inside, he cleaned everything with care, didn't toss anything without looking. He kept my old boots by the back door, said they belonged there. Then one day, he called in a carpenter and had a plaque made. He hung it right above the fireplace where my wedding photo used to sit. It said, "Thank you for being my father." Not like a father, not a mentor or a friend. Father. When the neighbors asked about it, he'd just smile and say, "This house came from a man who knew how to love in silence." It became a place of warmth again, a home not built on guilt or obligation, but on presence, on kindness. He didn't share my blood, but he carried my spirit. And as strange as it may sound, even in death I felt it, not in a ghostly way, just peace. My house, the one I built with my hands, was finally in the care of someone who saw its value, because he saw mine first. Funny thing about dying, it doesn't feel like an ending when you've already let go. I left quietly, but not defeated. not hollow. I didn't carry bitterness into the dark. Just a kind of steady calm that only comes when you've said what needed saying and done what needed doing. My son believed for a long time that I was nothing without him, that without his calls, his permission, his approval, I'd just fade away. But what he never understood was that I had already lived my life for him. And when he chose to walk away, he didn't just lose a father. He lost the proof of how deeply he'd been loved. Because all, those years, the sacrifices, the nights I stayed late fixing things, the holidays spent alone so he could build his own family, those weren't debts he owed me. They were gifts. And one day, he simply stopped opening them. So, I stopped giving. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. Because love without respect is just servitude, and I was not born to be forgotten in the house I built. When Jeremy found the letter, when he stood in my home and cried over words that were never meant to impress, just to honor, I knew I hadn't disappeared. I hadn't been erased. I had simply been misplaced until someone chose to see me clearly again. And that's the justice, isn't it? Not in revenge, not in taking something away, but in giving it to someone who knows what it's worth. My son will move on, maybe. He'll carry the weight of that letter in quiet moments. He may try to bury it with distractions, but the words will remain, like footprints he can't scrub from his memory. But Jeremy? He will build something from the ashes, not because he had to, but because he wanted to. And in that, I live on. In the creak of the old floorboards as new feet run through the hallway, in the warmth of a light left on in the kitchen, in the plaque above the fireplace that says I was something to someone, that I mattered. So if you're listening, if you felt the sting of being forgotten by the ones you held closest, let me tell you this. You are not erased, not while your story still breathes in someone's heart, not while your name still brings light to someone's day. You may be gone from their table, but you are not gone from meaning. And as for me, I left this world with less in my bank account, maybe, but not 1 ounce of dignity left behind.